Hi, welcome back to the C.A.N Sisters Ministry channel. I'm Natalie Bergquist, and today we are going to be talking about times of waiting. So waiting is something that none of us like to do. Whenever we're waiting for something, we typically get impatient and wish that we could just get whatever we want right away. However, God typically uses the times of waiting that He has us go through to deepen our faith and strengthen our character. When I was in the 8th grade, I lived in China for 5 months with my family. And during this time, we were able to go to Shanghai Disneyland. We got to go on a lot of different fun, creative, unique rides. However, we spent most of the day that we were there waiting in long lines. And because of this, we only got to go on a few different rides. During the time that we spent waiting in line, I often wondered if the ride was actually worth the wait. It was a hot day and we just had to stand there with nothing to do or talk about for most of the day for hours on end. But finally, when we got to the end of the line, I would basically forget all about the line and the time waiting in the hot sun, and I would enjoy the ride and be glad that I spent the time waiting in line. Looking back at that day, even though I do remember the lines, the main thing that I remember the most clearly is the rides and how much fun I had on them. Waiting for God to fulfill His promises that He's made to us can often feel like waiting in one of these long lines at Disneyland. At the time, we wonder if it's worth the wait, and we get impatient and start to doubt God and doubt that He's going to fulfill the promises that He made to us. Maybe we misheard Him, or maybe He's changed His mind. However, when we finally get to the end of the line and can see the future that He has planned for us, the future that He had in store for us all along, we realize that it was worth the wait. In the Bible, a man named Abraham learned the value of waiting. God called them to move to the land of Canaan and leave behind their family, their home, and everything they knew to a foreign land that they had never been to before. And when God called them to the land of Canaan, He made an impossible promise to them. He told them that in their old age, they were going to have a baby. Even in her younger years, Sarah had not been able to get pregnant. She was barren and had never been able to have children. However, God promised Abraham that He would give him a son, and through the son, He would make Abraham the father of many nations. And from this line that would come from Abraham's descendants would eventually come the Messiah, Jesus. However, Abraham and Sarah did not know all this. They couldn't see the future that God had for them and their descendants. All they had was a promise that God had made that seemed impossible and defied all logic and reason. God did eventually fulfill this promise, but Abraham and Sarah had to wait for 25 years before God finally fulfilled this promise. Typically, when we're waiting for God to fulfill a promise, the longer that we have to wait, the harder it is to have faith and to trust Him. While we're waiting, we often begin to doubt and question, thinking maybe God had changed His mind, or maybe we had misheard, or maybe this promise truly was impossible. About 10 years after God had initially made this promise to Abraham and Sarah of giving them a son, Sarah began to doubt and decided to take matters into her own hands. She had a maidservant or slave named Hagar from Egypt, and she one day decided to go to her husband and ask him to sleep with Hagar and make her one of his wives so that Sarah and him could have children through Hagar. This seems like a very strange and barbaric practice to us nowadays, but this was a common practice in their time and culture. In the ancient Near East, the culture that they lived in, it was very common for a woman to give her maidservant to her husband as an additional wife when she was barren and unable to conceive, so that she could have children for him through her servant. The children that the servant would bear for her husband would be considered her children rather than the children of the woman who actually gave birth to them. And so Abraham listened to his wife. And so he took Hagar as his wife and slept with her, and she eventually became pregnant and gave birth to a son named Ishmael. However, after Ishmael was born, God reminded Abraham of the promise that He had made to him. And Abraham asked God to make Ishmael the son who he could fulfill the promise through. However, God insisted that he would give Abraham a son through his wife, Sarah. And so eventually, God did fulfill this promise. And 25 years after God had initially made this promise to Abraham and Sarah, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She gave birth to Isaac when Abraham was 100 years old, and she was also quite elderly. This promise seemed impossible, not only because they were so elderly, but also because Sarah had been barren her entire life. However, God still fulfilled this promise, and he did the impossible by giving them a son. Having faith during times of waiting can seem impossible. The longer we have to wait, the more impatient we often become, and the more we begin to doubt and question God and his faithfulness and his promises. However, when we choose to trust him and have faith, even when it seems impossible for him to fulfill his promises, God uses the times of waiting to strengthen our faith and deepen our character. I am currently in a time of waiting right now in my life. God made promises to me about my future when I was only 16 years old, and I'm still waiting for him to fulfill those promises. The longer I wait, the more difficult it becomes for me to trust him. However, God has continually helped me have faith and helps me learn to trust him and be patient as I wait on his perfect timing. The book of Hebrews says, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Even though faith often feels impossible in times of waiting, true faith does not depend on circumstances. God calls us to have faith and to trust him no matter what season of life we're in. God will do what he has said and fulfill his promises in his perfect timing and way. All we have to do is trust him and wait and be patient. Thank you for watching today. If you want to learn more about this topic, I have a blog post that I just posted for the month of July on my ministry website, the C.A.N. Sisters Ministry at Wix.com. I have put a link to the website in the description of this video. So you can either look up the C.A.N. Sisters Ministry at Wix.com and go to the blog section and select In Times of Waiting, or you can go to the description of this video and click on the link which will bring you directly to the blog post. Once again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.